Hello for everyone. My name is Moana HoChing. I am the current president of the Harvard Alumni for Oceania. And I'm also here today in the capacity of a co-collaborator for the Harvard Oceanic Collections Engagement Fellowship. Thank you so much for joining us today for our informational session. Before we begin, I would like to recognize the sovereign nations of the Goshu, Paiute, Shoshone, and Ute peoples, and who are the traditional stewards of Salt Lake County, from which I reside. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which Harvard University is located, the Massachusetts people and their elders, past, present, and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge the Nipmuc, Mashpee, and Wampanoag peoples with whom Harvard has had a long historical relationship. And I would like to acknowledge the First Nation elders who are here today. Someone else who I'd like to introduce as partners today is my co-collaborator, Ingrid Ahlgren, curator for the Harvard Peabody Museum's Oceanic Collections. She's here with me today to share with all of you the new HOCEF Fellowship. So again, thank you for being here. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ingrid.
Hi, thank you, Moana. And good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here right now. As Moana noted, my name is Ingrid Ahlgren. I am the curator for the Oceanic collections here at the Peabody Museum at Harvard University. Tonight, I am calling in from my home and office here in Somerville, Massachusetts, which is situated, as is the Harvard Peabody Museum, on the homelands of the Massachusetts people, a group of people that has continuously endured and persevered through centuries of conflict and change. And I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and becoming. And I also want to pay my respects more broadly to the peoples of Oceania, and in particular, the people of the Marshall Islands that have warmly endured my explorations and interests in their homelands over the years. And it's a place that I have been fortunate enough to call home for over 10 years. I was born and raised in the Marshall Islands as a non-Indigenous person. And it's from that very unique background that that's where I'm coming from tonight to talk to you all. And if it wasn't for those experiences and that warmth and that kindness, that generosity, I wouldn't be here today. So, como dada jen burua. I'm really excited to be here tonight. This has been something that Moana and I have been talking about for a couple of years now on the Harvard campus before she moved to Utah, back to Utah. And it's actually really exciting to see it come to fruition and to get people involved at this point, to take it out of our brains and out of kind of our thoughts and our emails and our Zooms and bring it out to people. So really excited. And I should say that it's been a kind of a really collaborative project. From the very beginning, we've had many supporters and partners that have helped us out in a variety of ways. And there's 3 partners that are here that are going to join us tonight. So I'd like to ask Jane, Catherine, and Whitney to join us on screen. And first, I will turn it over to the Peabody Museum at Harvard's William and Muriel Seabury Howells director, Jane Pickering, which will then be followed by Catherine Bond Stockton, who's the dean for the School of Cultural and Social Transformation at the University of Utah. And finally, we'll be joined by Whitney Tassie, the senior curator and curator of modern and contemporary art at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. So, Jane.
Thank you, Ingrid. And I'm really delighted to be here this evening. I'm coming from the traditional lands of the Quinnipiac, or people of the long waterland here on the Connecticut shoreline. And when Ingrid first talked about her conversations with Moana about community-driven fellowships, I was thrilled. As a result of the legacies of imperialism and colonialism, the Peabody Museum now cares for the cultural heritage of communities from around the world. And today we're committed to a holistic program of ethical stewardship of the collections, a set of values and practices that promote historical reflection while directing museums to become agents of a more equitable and inclusive future. And fundamental to this effort, of course, is building and nurturing respectful, open, and reciprocal relationships with descendant communities and heritage stakeholders who are the primary authorities on their own cultural heritage. And this project will enable us to do that, to learn from members of the Oceanic community and to privilege your voices in the interpretation of collections, and especially to highlight contemporary issues of diaspora communities. So before passing on, I would like to finish by thanking our partners, Moana, of course, and the Harvard Alumni for Oceania, and our colleagues at the University of Utah School for Cultural and Social Transformation and the Fine Art Museum. And we thank you for including us in this wonderful project. And I'd also like to thank our attendees for giving us your time and consideration. And now I'm going to pass the mic, the virtual mic, over to Catherine Bond-Stockton. Thank you.
Jane, thank you. And hi, everybody. I'm so excited that this evening has finally come. So many conversations and so much connection and just so much amazing groupthink has gone on. Now, you might wonder, what is a school for cultural and social transformation? So I will just tell you in the simplest terms, we are a school for intersectional inquiry. We're a freestanding college inside the University of Utah. We're comprised of the Division of Ethnic Studies, the Division of Gender Studies, the Disability Studies Program, and the Pacific Island Studies Initiative. And in fact, we have a brand new undergraduate certificate this year in Pacific Island Studies. We have phenomenal faculty who are doing this work, and their expertise is transforming our school. Way too late, in my opinion, has the University of Utah finally understood this tremendous blessing in our midst to live in a valley just rich with Pacific Islander communities. So I also want to give my tremendous thanks to Moana and Ingrid. This is such an endeavor of the heart. There's so much passion here linked to very expansive ideas. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be a part of it. So thank you for having me this evening.
Hello. I want to echo everything that Jane and Catherine said. It's great to be here with you all tonight. I'm Whitney Tassi, Senior Curator and Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts on the campus of the University of Utah. The UMFA is honored to be supporting this collaborative partnership between the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology and the Harvard Alumni for Oceania. This innovative fellowship is a great example of how collections care can be more equitable and inclusive by centering the voices and knowledge of descendant and diaspora communities. We are so inspired by Moana and Ingrid's program, and we're so looking forward to supporting their vision as well as those of the fellows in any way we can. So thank you for allowing us to be part of your vision and your plan. And we're excited to go forward on this journey together.
I just want to take a second on behalf of the HAO, the Harvard Alumni for Oceania, as well as everyone that's attending. I really want to thank the Harvard Peabody Museum, the University of Utah School for Transformation, as well as UMFA. I don't think we could have done this work without you, with all of you. So thank you again for supporting and then just also coming along for the ride, because I know this is the first ever, but we just hope it doesn't end here. So the relationships expand there. So again, thank you, Jane, Whitney, Catherine. We are indebted to you as your support, and we are excited to see what happens within the year. So thank you to all three of you. Now, if we can transition, I'm really excited, really grateful for our partners. Now we're going to jump into the meat and potatoes of things, and I really wanted to thank you all of our panelists, but I want to jump in to a quick overview of the fellowship. This part I'm going to get out of the way because I feel like everyone's here to listen to Ingrid. But I just wanted to do a quick history and overview of the fellowship, go into details, give some context to those that are attending tonight, to give you some grounding and context. And then we're going to transition into Ingrid, giving more information about the actual collections. So if I'm just going to share my screen real quick. So we're all here tonight to learn more about the Harvard Oceanic Collections Engagement Fellowship, which was released earlier this year. Tonight, we will be talking about the introductions of, technical difficulty, about the history and where we foresee the fellowship going. So just as a background, you guys just met our partners, which is the Peabody Museum, HAO, the alumni group, University of Utah School for Cultural and Social Transformation, as well as the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. So we have all these experts here who are kind of guiding this fellowship, and we're so grateful to have them and their expertise. The history. So in 2018, a group of Pacific Islander Harvard students got together and recent grads and really wanted to explore the idea of creating a community. With that spirit, the Harvard Alumni for Oceania was initiated and approved as a Harvard Shared Interest Group in 2018. Negotiations with Harvard Peabody were started in 2019, thankfully through Ingrid. As those negotiations progressed, we were able to develop HOCEF, the first of its kind to be released here in Utah. And then today, where we're at is we're sharing the fellowship with you guys today and all the details with hopes of multiple applications coming from communities across Utah. Specifically Pacific Islander descendants. So the inception of the project and the justification, as we all know, cultural heritage collections are very important to the continuity of culture. We really wanted to concentrate on the interaction with collections because we believe that they're very integral into the enlivening of languages, cultural expressions, and traditional knowledges. Thankfully, Harvard Peabody has one of the largest collections of Oceania items in the United States. But our challenge here is that there's not any access or, as Jane alluded to earlier, stewardship within communities that these items have originated from. So this project aims to begin a process of proactively making space for and empowering Indigenous cultures to engage with their heritage within these collections. Our main goals, and again, I'll send these slides out to you guys, but the main goal is to increase awareness, get engagement with Indigenous populations, and then provide a space for community members to tell our stories and their stories that engage with some of these collections. And we also want to provide the support and opportunities for successful storytelling. Longer term, we're hoping to empower and sustain more diverse generations, establish and foster longer term relationships between museums and broadly the field of arts and museums with Oceania populations. And we want to set up regular or at least biannual interactions with the Harvard Peabody Museum with the diaspora communities located here in Utah. So I have had some questions of, this is such an awesome fellowship, but why Utah? First of all, we want to give context of the population here in Utah. Pacific Islanders have lived here. We predate the founding of the state of Utah. PIs have lived here since the 1870s, and the overall population is the biggest in the contiguous United States in a major city. So we're thinking about Salt Lake County, very concentrated area. And in addition, Pacific Islanders in diaspora here in Utah, we do not currently have a museum or a central location where we have our culture or items located. There's less access to art programs here in Utah. And then in addition, we were really trying to establish a relationship with one of the biggest collections in the United States. And what better time than COVID right now as we're doing virtual. So it's the accessibility and then the involvement of diaspora communities to come tell their stories and engage with these collections. More broadly speaking, what will the fellowship look like? We are seeking 2 fellows to be funded for $2,500 each to produce a reflection on, examination, and select museum materials of their choice. We're really encouraging descendants and Indigenous populations to go into these and go into this collection and then explore. You're able to search collections. We will be given opportunities to engage with Ingrid as well as Whitney to look at these items and receive help. It can be anything This is what's really, really exciting. Ingrid will dig into this. This is the largest collection, and there really is no, I would say, parameters around what can be used within these fellowships, but it does have to be focused on specific museum collections, so tangible items and results. So we are expecting fellows who do receive one of the 2 fellowships to produce something at the end to show to community. Again, the applications and the background, we're trying to make this as accessible. Engagement is the key to this fellowship. So we are not requiring for any educational background, nor do we require any museum experience. Applications will be reviewed by a local committee that's made up of local community members as well as representatives from all of our partners. And in addition, we will be providing assistance. So I'm so excited that Whitney and Ingrid are here. They are the experts, and they have kindly given their time to support these projects as they take fruition, grow into their vision. Fellows have 5 months total to complete this project. So just as a note, making sure that anything that we initiate can be done within those 5 months. Fellowship timeline, again, I know there's a lot of timelines on here and dates, but really we've outlined what the fellowship and those who are applying will entail, which started beginning of January of this year. But the most important dates that I want to communicate to those who are on the call today is today's call for the information session. We have April 1st, which is the first call for applications. Full application will be open, and then July 1st is one of the most important dates. This is the deadline. So anyone interested, individuals or groups who are interested in applying, just mark your calendars. July 1st will be the deadline. And with that, I just wanted to give an overview. I will be available at the end of this call for more questions, really here to talk story. But with that, I wanted to turn it over to Ingrid, in which she will dive deep into the actual collections piece, which I think is the most important part here. And I'm just really excited for all the stories that will be shared. And without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Ingrid. Ingrid, thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks again, Moana. It's a lot to take in. So, like Moana said, we're here to answer questions. At the end of the day, it's really about connecting collections back to oceanic peoples, right? So, as working as a curator at the Peabody Museum for about 2.5 years now, it just dawned on me, it's just so important to connect collections back to communities. And there isn't a large Pacific Islander diaspora in the Boston area, in the Harvard, Cambridge area. So how do we connect these collections to people? And I want to highlight that this is not to say that we're not connecting it to other people. The museum's collections are accessible online to absolutely anybody. You can reach out to the museum if you want to learn more information about the collections. We have a process for that. You can come and visit the collections as well as if you want, once the museum opens back up. And we hope down the line that we're going to open this up to other communities as well of Oceanic descent. I'm also reaching out to embassies and other people to make sure that people in these home countries also are aware of these collections. But this specific fellowship, we wanted to serve a very specific community, and that is the diaspora community in Utah, which has just been there for so long, is so vibrant, an important part of Utah's culture. It just doesn't have the same access to cultural heritage materials that other states do, like Washington State or California State, right? So that's the big impetus for that. So now what I'd like to do is just share with you all. I'll spend the next half hour just kind of talking about the Oceanic collections, giving an overview of them. And hopefully that will inspire you, those of you watching that are interested in applying, or those of you that just want to learn more about these collections, give you an idea about why Harvard? Why are they here at Harvard, number one? What are the collections? Where do they come from? How did they get here? And highlight a few examples of how museum collections can really share very unique, special stories, in particular about the history of these connections between Massachusetts and the Pacific Islands. So the first thing really I want to talk about is why Harvard? Why the Peabody Museum? So this museum, the Peabody Museum, is actually the oldest museum of anthropology, right? Anthropology, the study of human cultures, the study of humankind. It's the oldest museum of anthropology in the Americas. It was established by this guy, George Peabody, which is who the museum is named after, in 1866. In that year, he gives money to Harvard, and he says, I want to construct a museum building. I want to purchase artifacts, and I want to set up a position, a curator position, a curator professor position that specifically will oversee the museum and collections and lead scholarship about these collections. Now, initially, the museum was really focused on the indigenous peoples of the New World, so Native Americans, North and South America. And to get the collection sort of started, they published this circular, this advertisement that you see on the left of the screen here, putting out in papers, basically seeking donations. Does anyone have any stuff out there that they want to give to the museum, which is going to strive to study the peoples of the Americas and their histories and origins? And so while the main desire was really to acquire materials from the Americas, right from the very beginning of the museum, before the museum building was finished, there was materials coming in from the Pacific. So in 1867, the second group of materials to come into the museum is these three items. And these were already in the possession of Harvard College, as it was known at the time. Rumor has it they were actually found potentially in someone's closet, some high-member Harvard person. That's the rumor. And so it had been possession of Harvard College for decades, right? So these three materials came in: a Maori jade club, a patu, stones that were used in the mica game in Hawaii, and a davui shell horn from Fiji. Now, from that moment on, the Pacific collections expanded. So a third of the people that replied to that initial kind of advertisement, a third of those people donated Oceanic materials. And this is because many of the donors are actually residents of nearby Newburyport and these surrounding coastal towns. So Newburyport's kind of on the north, where you see sort of the ships and the fish jumping up there. Those towns up there were basically these coastal towns where most of the ships were leaving from the Atlantic. There was also some ports in New York and Connecticut. Massachusetts was really a hotbed for ships leaving port. And part of that has to do with the shape of the state and being a protected area. So the seafaring connections of these towns provided the Peabody Museum and other institutions this large and diverse array of cultural materials from the Pacific. And that begins from the 1780s, way before the museum is opened. You've got merchants and sea captains going out and traveling into the Pacific, as well as the Northwest coast, as well as China, and bringing things back. And again, the scholarly interest originally was about Native Americans, the peoples, the indigenous peoples of North and South America. But room was made for these global collections, not just from the Pacific, but especially from the Pacific. And it sort of fed anthropology's desire for comparison. And so in the first 40 years of the museum's history, so before 1900, the Peabody Museum had acquired a third of all of its oceanic collections that we have today. A third of it was acquired before 1900. And you can see here that the displays were just packed with materials. And that was the trend at the time in museums, was show everything you've got, just put it all out there. And it's a little different now, where collections are in storage and people select and choose materials to tell a particular story in an exhibit. And a lot of this material was actually used to teach, was used to compare cultures, the diversity of the human races. Where did people come from? How did they expand across the earth? And there was a particular interest, I like to call it an obsession, with the Pacific Islands, because Western scientists really were it was a mystery. How did humans go to live in these remote, distant, diverse islands, right? How did they get there? Did they come from South America? Did they come from China? And there was really kind of a curiosity about this. And if you're interested in that particular history, I just opened up with a co-curator, Dr. Tristan Jones from Australia. We opened up a new exhibit at the museum called Uncovering Pacific Past. That just opened up about a year ago, almost exactly, in just a few days before the museum closed its doors, as did Harvard University. So if you're interested in learning more about that particular exhibit, we have some of the materials online. We can share that in the chat if people are interested in looking at that. And I would also encourage many of you, if you're interested in this topic as well, we're hosting Dr. Palelei Arvin, who's from the University of Utah. She's going to talk next Wednesday about this very specific issue, about how Western scientists were really interested and obsessed with the idea of the Polynesian race and all of that kind of early racial thinking about the Pacific, and based on her book, Possessing Polynesian. So I would encourage you all to join us again next week. Now, where these collections come from, we have collections from all over Oceania, right? I think almost across the board, the materials. Now, certainly we have a lot more materials from these percentages that you see here, from Papua New Guinea, from Australia, Solomon Islands, Samoa, Hawaii, and Fiji in particular. And then it kind of gets smaller and smaller. But what I want to highlight is, say for instance, for example, this 3% that you see here from the Marshall Islands, that still means like 300 to 400 materials that we have from the region. And what does that include? There's lots of material from across the region. We've got jewelry, ornamentation, this beautiful feather headdress. We have several of these from Raivavai, from the Austral Islands. This woman's head ornament you see in the center that's made of dolphin's teeth from the Marquesas. There are drums and instruments. In the top right, you see an Ajay drum from the Marshall Islands that has on the top of it, the skin for it is actually made from the lining of a shark's stomach. We have other instruments from Hawaii all over the place, bamboo flutes, small nose flutes from Hawaii that are made out of gourds. We have over 60 canoes and canoe models. Most of those are canoe models, though we do have a few large canoes. And all sorts of materials related to canoes, navigation. You can see here one of the prow ornaments from the Federated States of Micronesia. We have feather capes from Hawaii. We have feather and flax capes from Aotearoa, grass skirts from across the region, and plenty of mats. We have over 300 mats in our collection from across the region. Some of those are sitting mats, some are floor mats, some are clothing mats, just a large variety. And some are ceremonial mats like Ietonga from Samoa. We also have baskets. Baskets actually represent, I think we have more baskets than anything else in our collection. I believe we have 1,000 baskets from Oceania, like this one you can see here in the bottom right from Tonga. We have dozens of kava bowls. There are carvings from all over Oceania, particularly from Aotearoa, from Rapa Nui, from Hawaii. Clubs, we have so many clubs. I believe we have 500 or 600 clubs. Some of them were weapons, some of them were ceremonial. There's a huge variety. We have over 500 pieces of tapa or kappa or ngatu or masi, depending on where you come from. And some of those are really large, expansive pieces that are rolled up for storage that really haven't been unfurled and unrolled for years. And we also have these small, you can see on the screen at the bottom there, these small kappa sample booklets that comes from Hawaii, so smaller pieces as well. We have ceremonial items like the eharo masks in the far right corner from the Elema people in the Papuan Gulf. But we also have lots of common items. I've mentioned kava bowls. We also have lots of coconut cups that you would drink kava from. I mean, we must have 50 to 100 coconut cups, right? Some very sort of ordinary things as well. Fish hooks, I believe. Actually, fish hooks, we might have more fish hooks than baskets, actually. We might have over 1,000 fish hooks from all over the region. Other fishing gear like large fish traps, lures. You can see we have some beautiful kali and other wooden pillows or headrests from around the region. And overall, the Oceanic collection is about 15 to 20,000 different pieces, right? And that doesn't include archaeological collections, but we really don't have a lot of those, to be honest with you. There wasn't a lot of digging involved at these collections. And there's a reason for that. It has to do with the history of these collections. I want to emphasize, though, that 20,000 materials, that is only those kind of 3D artifacts or items of cultural heritage or objects, right? In addition to that, we have tens of thousands of photographs, of prints, of journals, of diaries, of letters between different people. We have sound recordings. In the top right, you can see Douglas Oliver, who was actually the last curator before me in the 1960s. There's been a long gap between curators looking after this material. Douglas Oliver is well known for his work in the Solomon Islands. We have a very large Solomon Islands collection thanks to his work. But he also traveled to the Sepik in New Guinea and made sound recordings and did other work there. In the top left, these photos, we have a set of photos that were just discovered recently in our collection that we thought were lost, that come from Roland B. Dixon, an anthropologist, and he traveled to Fiji in 1909. On the bottom right, we have photographs from Alexander Agassiz, who made several expeditions to the Pacific over the years. He also has many journals and writings and images, and large collections as well. And certainly some of the scientists along the way in their travels in the Pacific also collected prints, other photographs that other people took. There's these stereo cards in the bottom left that are kind of these postcards from the Second Prussian expedition to Palau in the late 1800s. In the center, we have lots of copies of various studio portraits that are by well-known photographers that have a lot of interesting issues that need to be unpacked in the way Pacific Islanders were posed and displayed. So I just want to make sure to highlight that there's lots of materials that aren't just kind of object-based to consider. And these materials come from all over the region, from hundreds of collectors' moments and experiences. And there's a few ways, major ways that we received and acquired collections very early on at the Peabody Museum at Harvard that I want to highlight, both to kind of give an idea about the history of this region behind these collections and how they came to be at Harvard, but also to remind us of that really strong link historically between Massachusetts specifically and the Pacific Islands. And it's one that many of us, I think, don't think about or haven't thought about a lot on a regular basis. But it's important to remember that Massachusetts had the strongest and earliest American impact on the Pacific. And by American, I mean USA American, the earliest American impact in interactions with the Pacific Islands. And it was this very contact with the Pacific that played an important role for the development of America, the United States of America. It was those markets and those interactions that led to the economic survival after the Revolutionary War. And so what I'd like to do is do my best to highlight and not go into too much detail about some of these early moments of collecting and where these things come from and that contact between Massachusetts and the Pacific Islands. So the first one is this China maritime fur trade. This was a ship-based trade, essentially where people would travel to the northwest coast of the United States, of Canada, Alaska, that whole region, and would acquire and would trade for sea otter furs with the indigenous peoples of that area. And sea otter fur pelts were particularly desirable in China. And part of that has to do with the fact that they have the thickest pelt out of any other animal. And so they were highly desirable in China. So the idea was you trade with the indigenous people in Canada, Washington State, Oregon, Alaska area, right before they sort of became states. And you take that material and then you travel via ship over to Canton or Guangzhou in China. You trade for materials there, for tea, for porcelain, for silks, other things that you could bring back and sell to other markets in Europe, United States, things that people were highly desirable for. And this market had already existed. The Russians were actually some of the first people to explore working with the indigenous peoples of that area and acquiring sea otter pelts and trading them in China. But the Americans very quickly came in, as well as the British in the 1780s, and the French as well actually had an active role there ongoing. Now, what's kind of interesting is that there's a man from Connecticut who traveled with Captain James Cook. A lot of us are very familiar with Cook's travels in the Pacific in the 1700s. And this guy, John Ledyard from Connecticut, he traveled on board and he basically said, you know what, we can make more money if we stop in the Pacific Islands along the way. And some people had already been doing that already to sort of refuel, or just they sort of ended up there. But John Ledyard said, what we do is we travel to the Northwest coast. You can see sort of the journey that people took. Trade for sea otter pelts there, then travel through the Pacific on the way back and forth. And that's where you start to see the development of trade like sandalwood, sea cucumber, bêche de mer, all these trade that had huge impact on the Pacific Islands and islanders. And so you've got so many ships all of a sudden that are leaving Boston that the indigenous peoples on the Northwest coast in North America started calling all Americans that were coming through there Boston men. You've got basically, in a couple decades, you've got more people leaving from Boston via ships than from Europe. There were more ships in Massachusetts in the Pacific than any other country in Europe, just from Boston, just from Massachusetts. Now, one of those people was Captain James McGee. He's one of the very first people to sail from Boston to Guangzhou or Canton in the 1780s, and he acquired a lot of materials along the way. Now, for him, you know, we look at them and we see artifacts, museum collections. For him, they were probably souvenirs at the time, right? And his stopping, you can see on the left-hand side, he collected materials from the Northwest coast, from a variety of indigenous peoples that he interacted with first. And then on the right, you can see this is just a sample of 3, but he collected many fish hooks from all across the different places that he stopped in the Pacific. And the reason that I like to show this, they eventually ended up at the Harvard Peabody Museum. They're really early collections, right? Probably 1780s, 1790s. But really, they kind of encapsulate that time period of collecting just souvenirs. And it's kind of this little smattering, just a few pieces here or there. Now, the collections at Harvard likely contain hundreds of pieces from this time period, from traders and merchants, like this ceremonial adze from the Cook Islands, or this stone fishing sinker in the top right from Aotearoa. But there are likely hundreds more of these materials that just haven't been researched, and we continue to have question marks about them. And again, this is something that I'll get back to in a moment and try and explain. I did want to share, this is one of the most well-known pieces and well talked about pieces in the Peabody Museum collections at Harvard, and that is this mahiole, this feathered hat, this helmet in the top left corner. That a lot of research has been done. It comes from this China trade period, and a lot of research has been done, not by myself, really brilliant colleagues out there that have demonstrated that this hat was actually given to George Washington at a certain point. And George Washington received it from John Hancock. John Hancock, some of you may remember, you know, he's the guy that signed his name gloriously large in the Declaration of Independence for the United States. He was also the governor of Boston for a long time. And John Hancock had received it from this guy in black and white, this guy named Captain Robert Gray. He was the very first American to circumnavigate the globe. So that means, you know, he leaves from Boston in his ship and he travels around the entire globe without kind of doubling back. So he goes around the entire way. This was a really big deal. And so the parades were thrown in the streets of Boston in the name of Captain Robert Gray, right? And people notice there's all these interesting accounts that you can look back and read where people are like, there was this other person that was with Captain Robert Gray, and he was wearing this glorious outfit of beautiful feathers, and he was a prince from Hawaii. Now, at some point in Captain Robert Gray, his travels, he came upon this prince, and this prince joined him for the whole sort of trip, right? And eventually joined him on many other expeditions over several years. That cloak and that hat at some point were given to Governor Hancock and then passed on to George Washington. And the reason I kind of bring that up is because each of these pieces has this little individual, interesting, unique story, right? It's all about interactions between people. Now, little is actually known about this Hawaiian prince. But I firmly believe that more research can be done and we can learn a little bit more about him and hopefully down the line add his voice, his side of the story to that experience. Now, another of the major early reasons why we have collections from the Pacific that are related to Massachusetts is Massachusetts' role in the origin of American missionaries. And in part, it's thanks to this man here, this Kanaka Maoli, this Hawaiian man, Opukahaya, or Obukaya, as he's listed here in his portrait. And he was integral to missionaries going out to Hawaii and further abroad in the Pacific. And part of this had to deal with the development of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, or ABCFM. A terribly long name, but an incredibly important group of people. They had one of the largest impacts of Protestant missionaries working in the Pacific for 50 years plus and had just really large impacts. So this man here, Opukahaya, in the year 1809, supposedly, he was in the Big Island in Hawaii, and this was a really turbulent time for Hawaii for political status. There was a lot of shifting of leaders and kings grappling for power, a lot of other foreigners coming in and interfering with that process. And Opukahaya, the story goes that there was kind of a large battle. Many of his family members had been killed. And so he jumps into the water and he swims up to this ship. And he gets brought aboard this ship, which is a ship that came from Connecticut. The captain's name was Caleb Brintnall. And the captain says, sure, come aboard with us. And he travels, just like this Hawaiian prince, he travels on this ship for many years, eventually going back to the coast of Connecticut, where Yale is. And he gets dropped off as Yale, and he actually gets an education there. Now, it's important to keep in mind that at the time, Harvard and Yale and other colleges were religious institutions. They were primarily set up to train ministers, and that was the case for Yale, and that was the case for Harvard, amongst others. And so Opukahaya becomes a Christian, and he feels very convicted. He says, I want to share this message back with other Hawaiians. And this was fortuitous timing because just a couple years earlier, there was kind of this shift in the way Protestant Christians were thinking about their faith. There's this well-known story of these 5 young students that were training to be ministers in Massachusetts. They took shelter from a thunderstorm in this haystack, and each of them were praying, and all 5 of them individually had this vision that they were meant to go out into the world and share Christianity with the rest of the world. And that was the beginning of this ABCFM group. So Opukahaya becomes a Christian, as I said, and it is because of him and his desire to go out to Hawaii that this ABCFM decides to set up a foreign mission school to train people. And he was the first Native student, the first Indigenous student. There were many other people that joined down the line, but he was the very first. And he passed away in the year 1817, just before actually the first ship goes out to Hawaii. And so he didn't live long enough to see it. But in 1818, that's when the first missionary ship goes out to Hawaii from Boston with trained ministers there. And in the second ship that went out was in 1822. And that's when these 2 figures were collected by Reverend William Richards. And the reason they're kind of significant is because, again, as I say, this is a very tumultuous time for Hawaii's history in terms of leadership, cultural shift, foreign interaction. And once there was a unification kind of the kingdom of Hawaii, although that was a little bit contentious, there was a decision that they would get rid of the kapu, the sort of some of the sacred beliefs that Hawaiians were believed in at the time. And part of that meant that these 2 figures, these are sort of what we call wicker god figures, but they're actually a kuhulu manu, and they were really sacred, really important part of Hawaiian religion. And they were abolished. Many of them were collected, they were burned, they were destroyed, and only a few of them remain in museum collections, I think maybe 10 or 15 of them. And so they're such sacred objects, but they were actually allowed to be collected because the part of that religion was abolished at the time. And from that trip onwards, the missionary efforts based out of Massachusetts had really far-reaching implications for many Pacific islands and islanders. The mission school in Massachusetts and elsewhere brought lots of Hawaiians in particular, that would then be sent out to the Pacific. In Micronesia in particular, there was a lot of Hawaiian missionaries. And I have to say the ABCFM, a lot of that material, diaries, journals, handwritten notes, photographs, those things are most of them are actually here at Harvard. Not necessarily all at the Peabody Museum, but at Harvard's other libraries. And what's part of that story is you hear a lot of those writings from this kind of white Protestant perspective, and you don't hear necessarily a lot of the other side of the story. And museum collections, in my opinion, help fill that gap because they can kind of give a little bit of an idea about what were some of the motivations. So for instance, this map that you see here comes from the Marshall Islands. The ABCFM missionaries have been trying to go out to the Marshall Islands for many years, unsuccessfully, until 1857. The chief in an atoll in the southern Marshall Islands called Ebon Atoll, which for a while was called Boston Atoll because of this influence. Not by the indigenous people, of course, but by foreigners, considered it to be called Boston Atoll. And the Marshallese people under Iroj, or Chief Kaibuke, accepted the missionaries to come in. And a large part of that was because of the Hawaiian missionaries, not the white Protestant missionaries. It was really thanks to a man called Hezekiah Aiea, and they accepted Christianity. And Iroj, Chief Kaibuke, was wanted to say thank you for this and wanted to establish kind of diplomatic relations with King Kamehameha V, who was the king at the time in Hawaii. So he commissioned this mat, this woven mat, which it's very large. They're very important in Marshallese society. They're only given to sort of the highest, most important people in society, like chiefs. And so this was commissioned and sent on a ship to go out to be a gift to King Kamehameha V. Now, along the way, rats nibble on the little edge, as you can see in this photo here, which therefore can no longer be given as a gift. It would be an absolute insult to give that as a gift. So instead, one of the crew members got it, and it ends up in the Peabody collections. Now, what I like about this is I feel like it maybe gives us a little glimpse into the way that at least Iroj Kaibuke was viewing this kind of relationship, that it wasn't just about a relationship with God and with the missionaries. It was a relationship with Hawaii as well. And I think that's important to tell those kind of stories. Now, the third major moment, early moment for Massachusetts and for the Pacific is the whaling industry. Now, whaling in Massachusetts predates sort of their entry into the Pacific Islands, and certainly indigenous Americans from the coastal region were already hunting whales for centuries. And in fact, it was many of the indigenous Americans on the coasts of New England and Massachusetts that taught a lot of the colonial settlers how to catch whales. And from there, those kind of colonial settlers took that skill and kept going further out, catching bigger whales and going beyond, seeing that there was a large market for whale oil, for burning, for lamps, as well as other parts of the whales. And by 1730s, really these whalers started to expand beyond. And in about 1790 is when they started to go around the Cape Horn and go into the Pacific, which it was discovered was just this rich, fertile ground for whales, which unfortunately it isn't any longer, in part due to this sort of period. This sort of the whaling industry reached its peak in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. You've got 200 ships leaving the coast of Massachusetts every single year. You've got 300,000 men that have left the coast of Massachusetts. You can imagine the impact on families and communities in Massachusetts. Essentially, it gave Massachusetts and the towns of New Bedford and Nantucket the moniker of being the whaling capital of the world. And the museums have many collections from this time period over whaling expeditions over 50 plus years. Although just like those materials with the China trade, there's a lot of question marks with them. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of the reasons that they're hard to kind of identify is that when a lot of us think of whaling, we think of Moby Dick, we think of the Essex, we think of the Globe, we think of these epic stories that have been turned into books and movies. And you're like, oh yeah, there's all these documentation about what it was like. But most whaling journeys are kind of poorly documented. And many of the people that were on board these whaling ships were often young and illiterate. And so when they're collecting these souvenirs, really just one thing or 5 things or 10 things, they're not writing down exactly their significance or who they got it from and things. So a lot of these things actually come into our collections years and years and years later. So for example, the materials that are on the screen that you see, those are from probably the 1840s or 50s, although they came into the museum in the 1890s and 1900. Now, why do we know that they're from an earlier time period? Well, some of it has to do with, a lot of them were donated by grandchildren. They said, oh yeah, it's been in our collection for years. Other people discovered the 2 things on the left. Those were discovered on a farm. Another one was found in a storehouse, and they're all were sort of located in these whaling towns. And so if you take that material and you look into newspaper, town records, shipping logs, crew names, it's kind of possible to piece together who collected them and what that time period is. And so again, there's lots of materials like this that will just say, that like the top is a clamshell adze from Micronesia, and that's all it will say. Or it might just say adze or axe handle, right? Or weapon. It won't tell you where it's from. Or the Moai Kava Kava from Rapa Nui. It may not give you much information. And the other main reason that it's hard to piece some of these together is because a lot of these materials didn't actually come to the museum directly. A lot of them went to other museums, libraries, and collections first. This is really true for a lot of those materials from that China trade, from the whaling. You have to keep in mind that most of those were collected before 1866. That's when the museum opened. So they were already sitting in people's personal collections or in other collections. So it's important to keep in mind that in the 17 and 1800s in Massachusetts and New England, there are lots and lots of libraries and these things that we refer to as learned societies. They're kind of these semi-professional groups or associations that gathered together people that had similar interests or professions or lifestyle. So a lot of times it had to do with arts and sciences, people that collected rare books and wanted to read stories from across the world, people that were avid travelers. There was even societies set up to support the sailing community. So for example, the Boston Marine Society was a charitable organization. It was established in 1742 to support families of ship crews, because all those people that are going out in whaling missions and other missions and the China trade expeditions, they're out at sea for years often, right? So there was these kind of organizations to set them up. And when the people came back with some collections, they often deposited them in these little offices or libraries of these associations. And after time, many of these associations decided to donate those to a museum. So a lot of these materials that you see here on the screen, there's a malo from Hawaii, a taumi from Tahiti, one of the beautiful feather breastplates. A lot of those pieces come from these other places. And when they come, they don't necessarily have a lot of information. It really varies. So there's 2 examples here. One on the right is a tuputa, a bark cloth poncho from Niue, a very early piece that was when it was given had a note that said it belonged to a chief's daughter. So there's some kind of connection there between the collector who interacted with someone probably. But many of our early collections will just say what this other one says. It'll just say club from Fiji or club from the South Seas. And you have to, if you can, piece together some of that information. Some of these, there's kind of one memorable story that I wanted to share with you about the fact that not only were these learned societies around, but there are other museums around. There were museums set up in Boston that, over time just failed, whether it was financial reasons or in the case of the Boston Museum, the man who set it up, Moses Kimball, after he passed away, his family just decided not to continue with it. And so the heirs of Moses Kimball basically needed to get rid of just a huge, huge collection from all across the globe. And so they set up what was essentially a glorified yard sale. In this warehouse, there were piles of materials: buffalo robes, shell ornaments, hand axes, a canoe from Aotearoa. And people could go in and just request things and scoop them up. And the Peabody Museum did just that. And over 1,400 pieces came from the Boston Museum in the year 1899, and 300 of them came from Oceania. And you can kind of imagine, with truckloads of materials coming in, there's probably not a lot of tags, probably not a documentation, and so you have to use other information. So these three pieces on the left, there's two carved animal and human figures from Rapa Nui, and there is this carved fisherman's god figure from Rarotonga. And those we know that they came from the Boston Museum now, because there were these kind of other things that were written. There was this tale written about this boy who traveled to the Boston Museum and remembered certain things, which he labels here as heathen idols, unfortunately. You can see the pictures match exactly the collections that were there. So those are the kind of clues we can sort of piece those things together. Now, this is all very research-based, right? Documents-based. And I want to make sure I'm getting the point across that that's not what anyone who wants to apply for this fellowship has to do. That's a lot of the work that I do in investigating those stories. But what we really want to do is inject Pacific voices, other people's voices into these collections, and let other people reflect upon them. And so one of the other ways that the museum sort of increased its collections was by dealing with traders. And I won't talk a lot about this, but there was a specific point in time when essentially, on top, there was a huge demand for artifacts, essentially. And there was a large, this is during the time period when the world is becoming smaller. There's people of vastly different backgrounds and cultures are coming into contact on a regular basis. And so you start to see a few people that take this up as a profession almost. They became artifact dealers. They've got money, they've got connections, they can travel, they can make these large collections and then sell them to a museum. And so some of our collections come from that process, as well as from other like government officials. We have collections from German, British, and American colonial officials that collected these materials knowing that they could sell them back home. So you see this interesting photograph. This is actually from a Swedish expedition in the 1880s, and the photograph on the bottom left, that's in the Swedish museum, their ethnographic museum there. And if you zoom in, you can see this whole collection of materials sitting on this colonial porch veranda. You've got armor from Kiribati and porcupine fish helmets. You've got buka paddles. You've got funerary, really important funerary carved figures from the Solomon Islands. And they're just kind of propped up and sitting there. And they probably ended up in museums, and they're probably the product of traders and dealers. And so we have some of that material. And the final sort of moment in time that I want to talk about for the Peabody Museum's collections has to do with scientific exploration, right? This is the 20th century sort of stuff. So most of the material I've talked about so far has come from the 1870s or earlier, a lot of times much earlier, right? The 1780s and 90s. So a lot of that material, as I've said before, came into the museum before the year 1900, and a third of the oceanic collections at the museum came in before that time. And a lot of those were those small groupings, individual collections. But at a certain point, there started to be more of a desire for larger collections. And some of that there's a variety of reasons for that, but some of it has to do with the desire of museums to kind of represent the entire world and show off the diversity, not only of animals and plants, but human cultures. So you think about all those old museums that you walk through, you see like huge stuffed animals and stuff, right? That was part of that same time period, saying, we want to collect one of everything in the entire world. And so around 1890 and beyond, the Peabody Museum specifically undertook a more organized manner to travel to the Pacific, in part to collect things and in part to do science, to do research. So it wasn't just for collecting usually. It also had multiple purposes: exploring, mapping, surveying, in addition to documenting and collecting cultures. And part of this idea comes from some racist notions about cultures are going to die out because of the superiority of Western societies, right? So kind of like salvaging what's left of cultures. It's very problematic sort of parts of histories. The thing that's interesting about the collections from these time period is that there's a whole ton of documentation with them usually. You get journals, you get photographs, you get writings of everyone kind of detailing. Sometimes people collected things that were halfway done so that you could see how things were done. So we have many mats that were sort of halfway finished so that you can see the process of how a mat may have been woven or plaited. Sometimes the raw materials were collected. So certain plants or buds or seeds that would be used to make dye, that material would be collected at the same time. So all of a sudden, there's this real interest kind of for scientific comparison and purposes to collect. And one of the most significant ones that happened in the Pacific that is reflected in our collections was one of the largest collecting expeditions that went out to the Pacific. It's the U.S. Fish Commission, and they went out to the Pacific many, many times. This was actually a civilian government agency that went out, and part of it was to do marine research, right? They wanted to know about fisheries off the coast of California and going westward. A lot of it had to do with economy. What else can we exploit from the Pacific region, basically? What's the new kind of market that we can dive into? And some of it was also science, in the name of science as well. So they did a lot of like measuring the depths of the ocean. A lot of our mapping of the ocean starts with this time period. And at the same time, they were collecting fish. So large, I think it's the largest collection of fish for that time period. And that material is split half between Harvard and half between the Smithsonian in DC. And that's because these organizations were working together with their scientists. So they went to the Pacific during these years. Alexander Agassiz is one of the big names that was associated with it from Harvard. They visited Rapa Nui, the Marquesas, the Society Islands, Cook Islands, Niue, Fiji, Tonga, Tuvalu, Kiribati, the Marshall Islands, the Caroline Islands, and elsewhere in Micronesia. And despite their focus on fish and sort of marine aquatic resources, they brought back 3,000 cultural materials from the region. Like I said, half here at the Peabody, half at the Smithsonian. And alongside that was a huge amount of photographs and drawings and notebooks and records. And a lot of our material from the Micronesian region actually comes from this specific time period. And I won't talk at length about this one, but this is one of my favorite pieces in the collection that comes from the U.S. Fish Commission. This is a canoe model. It's a Samoan canoe model of a Samoan war canoe, Alia, I believe it's called. And the reason that this is interesting, it was collected by Alexander Agassiz, right? The guy, this American scientist on this expedition. But he got it from a German colonial administrator in the Marshall Islands. And so there's kind of this interesting history to unpack there. And I don't know if you could read the little tag that came along with it, but it basically said, made by King Mataya's men while in captivity at Jalowit, Marshall Islands. So there's this long history there about the kind of some of the battles. Mataya, that's basically, I think they're conflating two different things. It was probably Mataafa, who is a high chief in Samoa, and his Matai, which are some of the men and community that surrounds a chief from Samoa. So in the 1880s and 1890s, there was these huge battles between a variety of chiefs in Samoa, but also a variety of colonial powers. You've got the Germans, the British, and the Americans, all kind of fighting for power in this area. And it's a pretty complicated set of histories, lots of different points of view. But at a certain point in the conflict, the Germans kind of picked a side. They decided, we don't want to deal with three different chiefs anymore. We're going to support this one guy. And we are no longer going to support Mataafa, who actually had a very popular sort of following with many Samoans. And so Mataafa, after a series of brutal battles, was forced to surrender, and he was shipped off to the Marshall Islands to the atoll of Jalowit, which was the capital, the German capital in the Marshall Islands. He was there for about 5 years, and that's when this canoe model was sort of made. And, a lot of these battles have been studied by historians, but not much is documented about Mataafa's time in the Marshall Islands, as far as I know. And I think it's kind of compelling because it gives us a possible glimpse into that time period and makes us think, well, what was his relationship like with the German administrators? Why did he make this? Was it for trade? Was it for favors? Was it for fun? Was it to demonstrate? Was it to compare with the other Marshallese people about their canoes? I've since found that there's another one of these in a German collection that I think is quite interesting. So Mataafa and or the people around him made more than one. And it's clear it meant that after 5 years, there must have been some relationships with the Marshallese people in the Samoans. So by looking at this one model canoe, you can kind of unravel and think about all those other relationships. These expeditions, of course, these scientific expeditions went on for years. At a certain point, the Peabody really focused on anthropology and collecting very specifically in the 1900s. I won't go into these specifically, except to note that you'll recall that kind of pie chart of where the collections come from, the Oceanic collections. And there was a large amount of material from Australia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. And that's specifically because of these expeditions in the 1900s, right, that go out there. So that, I know that's a lot of information to take in. That is kind of a broad history and overview of the collections at the Peabody Museum at Harvard, which really results from these whole series of links between Massachusetts and Oceania. And I just want to highlight that while, you know, the museum was originally linked to the university, its focus was on research and study and its students and education. Today, as our director, Jane Pickering, highlighted, today we're much more focused and we have a stronger commitment than ever to the concept of ethical stewardship and decolonization, right? Which entails not just this responsibility to students and to the public and research and education, but also to the communities that are related to these materials and the places that they come from. And that's a big part of, I think, what Moana and I wanted to do with this fellowship, is to really increase awareness of these collections here in the US, but also abroad, and also to seek new voices to tell some of these stories. Again, this is not, we're not encouraging everyone out there to go and choose a piece and do a historical look at the collections. You can absolutely do that if you're interested, but what we really want is some more creative ways of thinking about it. So, you know, how would that comb that you see from the Solomon Islands in the bottom left, how would it be worn? Who would wear it? What does it make you think of? What about the design? How is it made? We want to ask all of you to contribute your voices. It can be about history. It can be about design. It can be about, this makes me sad because it makes me think about colonialism. It's really open. It's an open door for those voices and those ideas to come in. I'll conclude by saying all of our collections are online and searchable. A lot of our records are not great, though. You can imagine with 20,000 pieces that it's a lot. It's really hard to keep up with our collection. So on the left-hand side, you'll kind of see this example. This is from a collection from this family, the Phillips family, and they worked with Queen Liliuokalani in the 1890s in Hawaii. They worked, one of the members was the Attorney General for Queen Liliuokalani, and they have a series of collections and photographs. And so you can see here, because they were in Hawaii and collected things and brought things back from Hawaii, this piece here says that it's from Hawaii. But I know that by looking at it, that is actually from the Marshall Islands. It's a waist rope that's actually it's very finely braided and woven. It's used as kind of a belt wrapped many times around the waist. And so that one hasn't been corrected yet, but you can imagine there's lots of these other materials like that. And so we've created a guide for searching the collections that you see a screenshot on the right, and we'll be posting it online, we'll be sending it out. That gives a little bit of help for how to find these things. But I just want to reiterate that we are here to help. We're not expecting you to be museum experts, right? So if you've got questions about collections or you can't find something, just reach out and let us know. So you can email us, you can reach out to us on Twitter, you can go to our website and reach out to us there as well. There's many ways. So thank you all for bearing with me. I don't know what time it is or how long that's been. I'm sure it's probably too long, but I'm going to ask Moana maybe to come back in and join us and just reiterate some of these final important dates again for the group.
Yes, definitely. Ingrid, thank you so much for that deep dive into the collections and actually giving us some context. It's really interesting that it's the largest collection in the US, one of the largest collections in the US, but as we have found, Ingrid, not a lot of descendants or peoples from these indigenous communities actually know what's in the collection. So I really appreciate you giving that context. Just as a reminder, we're going to open up for Q&A at the end of this. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone about two important dates. Ingrid has thrown up some dates to keep in mind, but the April 1st for the call for applications will be released, and then also July 1st. So we're encouraging people to take the summer to really dive deep and look into these collections. And again, we're encouraging not a research paper, it really is this engagement piece, right? As a student and engaging with the collections, it gave me a sense of home being outside all the way out in Boston, in the sense that there is some ancestral items, but it was also this sadness knowing that there are ancestral items or items that people don't know are in the collection. And so this is more so in that truth and reconciliation, in that vein of bringing truth to light through descendants, and then the reconciliation part, right? These narratives have been told from a Western perspective at most times, if not all, at all times. So really it's this ability to take these stories and make them our own. And I know Ingrid has mentioned it, but we are really open to anything: songs, stories, short stories, comic books, anything that relates to the items. I'm just very, as the current president of HAO, I'm just really excited to see how these stories go home in different ways, and these new and emerging ways of technology, and how we can connect those. So again, I want to remind everyone, beginning of April, this is not Ingrid, it's more me, that we have this moving timeline, but the applications will be released in April. July 1st, we'll do application calls. It'll go through a vetting system in which we have a local as well as our professionals here to make up the committee that oversees the application process. And then final projects are due August 1st. We'll announce the two winners. These can be individuals. So anyone who's participating tonight, you can submit a project by yourself, or if you have some additional Oceania folks who want to collaborate on a project, we are open to those projects as well. So we'll announce August 1st for awardees, and then January 2022, we're excited. Projects will be due, and we'll have a community show in which we can showcase these two projects. And so with that, I'm just going to mute myself. I'm going to invite people to ask questions. Please just jump in. This is really, we want this to be more of a conversation than us just talking at you. And then the dates, thankfully Liz has been amazing in this chat. She's been dropping links. So please go check out the page if I've missed any information. Everything is located on the Peabody Museum website. And then lastly, we're here to help. I hope that this seems like an open communication and an open line of collaboration. So with no further ado, I'm going to mute myself, and if anyone wants to ask questions, we'll just go through, and please point questions more towards the collections, towards Ingrid, and I'll defer to Ingrid for those ones. So again, thank you for coming tonight. I want to thank our sponsors and our collaborators, as well as the Harvard Museum of Science and Culture, who is hosting tonight. Thank you for your technical skills. We are so appreciative. And so with that, just going to open up to questions, and we'll go from there. So thank you guys so much for attending.
So it looks like, Moana, we do have a question. If you want to answer this one, it looks like we have a couple questions that both relate to the same thing. It says, is the fellowship open to non-Oceanic people too? And then also, can anyone from around the country apply?
These are great questions. Unfortunately, it's just for Oceania descendants right now. And it's very locally, it's only open to Utah diaspora for right now. As Ingrid had mentioned earlier, we're hoping to expand to larger diaspora after this inaugural project. So please stay tuned for those that aren't located in Utah. We hope to expand and bring more programming to the wider Pacific community, and then especially back home in the Pacific.
And it looks like we've got a question. Okay, so this is great. It sounds like Michelle has already been looking at some of the collections. So thanks, that's really exciting to know. But it was difficult to get to the written portion. Is that something we can get to look at to prepare applications? Absolutely. This is a really spot on, really good question, because essentially what we would ask you to do is that email address that was put out. It's like HOCEF at fas.harvard.edu, I believe it is. If you send an email to that and say, hey, I'm looking at these 3 pieces or these 20 pieces, and I'm interested, but I can't really find that much about it, let us know, and we will actually provide some information for you, and we'll get back to you so that you can make the decision. And we're happy to do that before applications close, right? So that's why we have a large period so the application material will come out April 1st, first week of April, somewhere around there. And the applications won't be due till July 1st. And we purposefully did that so people have time to explore the collections and reach out. We specifically have staff on board. We have a wonderful collections person, Diana Zlatanovsky, who's helping us with that process to kind of look at some of the back records behind. And so that's exactly why we put that gap in. So people reach out to us and say, help me learn more about these pieces so I know what I want to propose to do with them. So thanks for that question. It's great.
And I think the second part of that question is if someone in Utah, if someone is a Utah resident but ends up going to grad school outside of Utah in the fall, can they be part of the duo? Yes. So we're looking for residents. So if you call Utah home and have an address here, yes, definitely apply. And then moving into another question, Ingrid, is there anything a person not living in Utah can do to help with the inaugural fellowship, this program?
Wow, that is an excellent and broad program, a broad question. Off the top of my head, I can say, subscribe to our email, but also share a lot of our tweets. We just recently got Twitter up and running. So the more you can kind of share news about this with communities, the more people can know. And we really want as many people from Oceania to know that these collections exist and that they're part of their heritage and they're accessible for you all, right? I can also think, it's been kind of fun, but also intimidating at times. Moana might agree with me that, this is an experiment for us, really, right? We don't have a playbook that we're going by. And that's why we went out of our way to make sure that we have an advisory council that's made up of not just our partners and sponsors that you've heard from, but also community members, as Moana has mentioned, in Utah, because we want to make sure that we are serving the community, right? This is less about the museum than it is about the community. So I would also add that perhaps down the line, if this goes well, depending on how this fun fellowship experiment goes, we would like to expand that. And that's going to need a lot of support from a lot of different sort of sponsors and help. So I would say stay in touch. And if we think of anything specific, we can reach back out to you.
Awesome. I'm seeing a question. Would we be able to interview elders back in the islands as part of the presentations? Ingrid, do you want to take that, or do you want me to just
go for it, Moana?
Okay. Yes, this is highly encouraged. Although we don't have the capacity to facilitate that for folks right now, we hope to grow into that. But if people want to engage with home communities, but you're located in Utah, please do so. I know that we had an advisory committee meeting and we were just talking about how cool it would be if a descendant were to find an item from their village, from their family. We highly encourage people to look for that and see how they can connect it. So the short answer is yes. Please try to reach out to Oceania indigenous populations that are in Pacific right now. And then the second part of that, is there an opportunity to see these artifacts in person? So I'm just going to extend what Ingrid had mentioned earlier. In our HOPE, although this is the inaugural program, when we were sketching this out pre-COVID, if anyone can remember what that felt like or looked like, pre-COVID, we were trying to get students or at least fellows at Harvard to conduct these fellowships on campus. That was the original thought. So we hope to do that in the future in some type of iteration or in some type of capacity. So yes, that would be an opportunity, just not right now. And again, it's the logistics of planning that all out, but we hope to do it one day. And then I do want to reiterate, yes, the fellowship for now, this inaugural fellowship is only open to Utah residents at this time. And we hope to expand after this pilot program and getting feedback from it. Yes, perfect. And then Ingrid. And then I'm going to open up any other questions, comments, concerns, feedback. We're here for you guys. So really, Ingrid and I are open, whether it be a call, jumping on, if it's quicker. Peabody has an amazing staff. And going back to the question about if you will be able to see these artifacts in person, Ingrid has done this before and she's been so gracious to offer this. But once we get to that level, Ingrid's willing to like take the item out of not necessarily the collections, but have you remotely chime in from within the archive, and then her handling whatever artifact or item so that you can see it in person. So she's done this before. She's being so gracious in doing this in the COVID pandemic. But yeah, so we hope to get that type of engagement as well. So.
Yeah, so we would basically, if you're one of our finalists that gets selected, then you have access for several more months to our staff and our records to help you as much as possible to help achieve what you want to achieve. And that includes, like Moana is saying, these like we'd have video visits because of the pandemic. We hope in the future to bring people out to the collections in person. But for this round, it's going to be virtual visits, which means, like Moana said, it'd be me kind of picking up the objects, the materials, and kind of holding them around if you want, or zooming up close. It also means that we'll be able to do a little bit of photography for you. So if you say, hey, can you look closely at this little corner of this? I can't quite see it clearly. We'll do photography for you as well. So we are really trying to do as much as we can to make those collections come alive for you, even though we can't do that in person. And I also want to encourage, once the museum opens, like even outside of this fellowship, the museum, you can write us and say, I want to come see these collections. You don't have to have a university affiliation. You don't have to have some sort of qualification. You can just say, I'm interested in these collections. Can I come and visit them in person? And then we'll work with you to see how we can make that happen for you. So we really want to encourage that regardless of how this fellowship, whether or not it applies to you.
Awesome. So we're going to stay online, or I will, till the top of the hour, but I want to thank everyone for attending. I also want to let you all know that this has been recorded here in the Zoom session. We also will provide this as a YouTube video through the Harvard Peabody Museum's account and their platform within YouTube. So you will get access to this video to share. I know there's some people who aren't able to make it. So we hope to spread this and have this available to everyone post this meeting. And then again, Ingrid and I are open to communication. So please reach out if you have any questions or comments. We're just here to support this. And we hope that people find joy and excitement as well in going into these collections and finding heritage and stories that haven't been shared before, I think, in certain communities. So we're very excited. Again, thank you for attending. I'm going to leave up questions and then turn it over to Ingrid before we close out.
Yeah, I was just going to say there was an interesting question that came in. I'm wondering if, Moana, you want to address this one. It says, what exactly are you guys looking for in potential candidates? So a couple things I'll mention first, and then Moana, if you want to pick up from there, we will give you kind of more specific guidelines in the month of April that will kind of tell you, and there'll be an application form and stuff like that. One of the things that I'll say first is that we do want you to identify in your application which collections you're going to work with. So that's that's just not like, oh, I want to work with kappa from Hawaii. We want to say, we want to know that you've actually looked or reached out to us to find which kappa from Hawaii, which ones are you interested in, why, and then what's the story that you want to tell and how are you going to do it? So, and Moana, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, we're really looking for powerful storytelling. Really, I think we will have the parameters are obviously 18 and over, Utah resident, but within the application, how are you taking these items and bringing them to life in any aspect or form? We're really open to what that is. I've seen people do dance, performative arts in engagement pieces. So it really is how you're taking that item and then making it your own and telling a story about it. I know that's very broad, but again, that's the beauty of being the first program, I think, is like we have the ability to kind of bend and expand what could be considered an application. So more information will come out in April, but that's what we're looking for, is more a specific item that you're speaking to within the collection.
And follow us on Twitter, because we will be sharing, not only will be sharing some of our materials from the collections to kind of share them and talk story about some of them in some fun ways, but also we'll highlight some other artists, some Pacifica and Oceanic artists, and some of the things that they've done that kind of relate to collections, right? And that will helpfully help inspire people.
So with that, I think we're just going to close it out. Again, reach out if you guys have any questions. Our information is on that main webpage. Twitter is Peabody HOCEF, so HOCEF on Twitter. That is our only social media for now, as well as just joining the mailing list. You'll get all the information directly into your inbox. Thank you so much for attending tonight. We're grateful. We look forward to your applications for those that are applying, and then just the continuing of these type of conversations. So thank you so much for joining. Ingrid, I'm going to let you close it out for us before we end.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is about the community, the Oceanic community in Utah, and providing a platform for those voices. And for me, it's about learning. And so we'll see what happens from it. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share with you. And I'm grateful for Moana's partnership from day one, her inspiration to want to do this project. And again, I want to thank our partners. Of course, the Peabody Museum is the main host of this project, but also the Harvard Alumni for Oceania, Transform, the School for Cultural and Social Transformation at the University of Utah, Utah's Museum of Fine Arts. There's a whole host of people. I'm grateful for the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture for hosting us tonight. Thank you, Diana Munn, especially. And behind the scenes, we have two wonderful women that have been helping us out. That's Liz Tenray and Lahua Kano. So I want to thank you both for supporting us as well. And hope you all have wonderful evenings. And please don't be shy. Please reach out to us. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.